It was a quiet Monday morning in the county courthouse. The sun had just started to shine through the large windows, casting a warm light across the courtroom floor. The room was almost empty, except for a few lawyers sipping coffee and checking their files. Everything looked normal until she walked in. She wore a plain floral dress that looked a little wrinkled from travel. Her shoes were simple and her hair was tied back neatly. In her hands, she held a faded brown notebook that seemed almost too old to still be useful. She walked slowly, looking around as if unsure where to sit. Her steps were light, and her eyes moved carefully across the courtroom. The bailiff didn't pay much attention to her. The attorneys whispered among themselves, not giving her a second glance. She finally sat on the front bench, gently placing her notebook on her lap. No one noticed her hands trembling slightly as she opened it and began flipping through the pages. Some people assumed she had taken the wrong seat. Maybe she was someone's aunt or a concerned neighbor, they thought. She didn't look like a lawyer. She didn't have a briefcase or a laptop. She didn't speak to anyone. She just sat there quietly, eyes focused, lips moving slightly as she read. Soon, the courtroom started to fill with people. The lawyers took their places. The judge's clerk typed on her computer. The judge himself entered through the side door, his robe flowing behind him. The room stood for a moment, then everyone sat. The judge looked around the room, then paused. He noticed the woman on the front bench. He squinted slightly, leaned forward, and asked in a dry voice, "Ma'am, are you lost? This isn't traffic court." A few people chuckled. The woman looked up slowly. Her voice was soft but clear. "No, Your Honor. I believe I'm in the right courtroom." The judge raised his eyebrows. "And what brings you here today?" She looked down at her notebook for a second, then answered, "I'm here for the hearing on the workers' fraud case." The judge frowned. "Are you a witness? Family of the plaintiffs?" She simply shook her head. "I'm here to help present their case." The room went silent. Even the lawyers who had been whispering stopped talking. One of them let out a small laugh. "What does she mean, present the case? Is this a joke?" The judge held up a hand to quiet the room. He looked back at the woman and said, "Miss, are you saying you're a legal representative?" She nodded once slowly, "Yes, Your Honor." Before the judge could respond, a voice from the back of the courtroom muttered, "This should be interesting." The woman didn't react. She closed her notebook and sat calmly, waiting for the next moment. And just like that, everyone in the courtroom began to wonder, who was this quiet woman with the old notebook? And what was she really doing there? The courtroom was quiet for a few moments after the woman spoke. Everyone was still trying to figure out what she meant. The judge leaned back in his chair, clearly surprised. His tone was more curious now than mocking. "Do you have any legal documents with you?" he asked. The woman reached into her small bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She walked slowly to the front and handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. He unfolded it, adjusted his glasses, and read quietly for a few seconds. Then he looked up. "Well," he said, "according to this, your name is Amelia Jordan, and you passed the bar exam 5 years ago." A few people in the courtroom shifted in their seats. Some leaned forward. The whispering started again. "That can't be right," someone muttered under their breath. The judge cleared his throat and continued, "Miss Jordan, are you currently practicing law?" Amelia shook her head. "No, Your Honor. I haven't practiced officially. I've done legal research and helped with a few community cases, but this would be my first time speaking in court." The judge looked at her carefully. "And you want to represent the plaintiffs in this fraud case? This is a serious matter." Amelia nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I've followed this case from the beginning. I've reviewed all the files. I know the details. The people involved trusted me to speak for them today." The judge turned to the other side of the courtroom. "Do the plaintiffs agree to be represented by Miss Jordan?" An older man in the front row stood up. His face was tired, but his eyes were steady. "Yes, sir," he said. "We know her. We trust her. She's helped us more than anyone else has." The judge sat quietly for a moment. He seemed to be thinking deeply, then he nodded once. "Very well, Miss Jordan, I will allow you to represent the plaintiffs. But be aware, the opposing side has an experienced legal team. This will not be easy." Amelia simply said, "I understand, Your Honor." The defense lawyer, a tall man in a sharp suit, stood and spoke loudly. "This is highly unusual. We object to this arrangement. She's clearly not prepared for a case of this level." The judge responded firmly. "You'll have a chance to argue your case like always. If she isn't ready, it will show. Let's proceed." Amelia returned to her seat. She opened her notebook and placed it on the desk. Her hands no longer shook. She looked calm, focused. People in the courtroom exchanged glances. They didn't know what to expect. Some still thought she didn't belong there. Others were beginning to feel curious. No one knew that Amelia Jordan was about to surprise them all. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as Amelia returned to her seat. She didn't seem nervous anymore. In fact, she appeared completely calm, almost as if she had been preparing for this moment her entire life. While the defense team whispered to each other, she took a deep breath, flipped through her notebook, and began organizing her papers with quiet confidence. The judge called the court to order and motioned for the defense to begin. The defense lawyer stood up with a quick, sharp movement, adjusting his tie before addressing the court. Your Honor, we intend to prove that the plaintiffs have misunderstood the nature of the contract and the claims they are making against my client. We will show that these allegations of fraud are baseless. Amelia watched carefully. The defense lawyer was smooth and polished, his voice confident as he spoke. He went over the key points of the defense, presenting facts and figures. He seemed to be in complete control, and many of the people in the courtroom nodded along, convinced by his arguments. But Amelia wasn't convinced. When the defense lawyer finished, the judge nodded and gave Amelia the chance to speak. She stood up slowly, still quiet, but her presence in the room suddenly felt much larger. All eyes were on her as she took a few steps forward and stood at the podium. She cleared her throat softly, glancing at her notebook one last time. Then, without looking at anyone directly, she began. Your Honor, the defense claims that the plaintiffs have misunderstood the contract, but the truth is, it's quite clear. The contract was not designed to protect the employees. In fact, it was built to take advantage of them. A murmur ran through the courtroom as Amelia's words sank in. The defense lawyer's expression shifted slightly, but he said nothing. Amelia continued, her voice steady and calm. I've reviewed every single page of the contract, as well as the email correspondence between the company and the employees. There's a clear pattern of deception. The company misled the workers into signing contracts they did not fully understand, promising benefits that were never delivered. The courtroom was quiet now. No one had expected such a strong response from her. She had laid out the facts clearly, without hesitation. Amelia turned toward the judge and continued, these workers trusted the company, but they were exploited. They were promised fair wages, benefits, and job security, but instead they were left with nothing but broken promises. The defense lawyer stood up quickly, his face turning red. Objection, Your Honor. She is making sweeping statements without any real evidence. The judge raised his hand to calm the room. Sustained, he said. Miss Jordan, stick to the evidence. Amelia nodded unshaken. I will, Your Honor, she said, and then proceeded to pull out a series of documents from her notebook. Here are the signed contracts and email exchanges that clearly show the deception, and here is the list of employees who were affected by this fraud. She passed the papers to the bailiff, who delivered them to the judge. As the judge looked through the documents, the defense lawyer stood there, silent, unable to respond. The courtroom had shifted. The power had changed hands, and it was clear to everyone that Amelia was more prepared than anyone had expected. The room was still. Everyone's attention was fixed on the judge as he read through the documents Amelia had presented. Even the defense lawyer had stopped trying to interrupt. The judge turned the pages slowly, his eyes scanning each one carefully. He paused every now and then, making notes in the margins. The silence in the courtroom grew heavier with each passing second. Amelia stood quietly by the podium, her hands folded in front of her, waiting. She didn't seem anxious. She didn't fidget or glance around. She simply stood still, watching the judge. The people in the courtroom couldn't help but notice how calm she was, how sure of herself she seemed. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge placed the last page down on the table. He looked up at Amelia, his expression serious but thoughtful. For a moment, no one spoke. Miss Jordan, he said slowly, his voice carrying through the quiet room. You've presented a compelling case. The evidence you've shown is strong, and the argument is clear. Amelia nodded, but she didn't smile. She wasn't here for praise. She was here for justice, for the people who had been wronged. The defense lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, we still believe that the plaintiffs have misunderstood the terms of the agreement, he said, trying to regain control. The documents Miss Jordan has provided are not conclusive. There is no proof of any intentional wrongdoing. The judge looked at him, his eyes sharp. I believe that's for the jury to decide, he said firmly. But the documents Miss Jordan has provided raise important questions. I will allow her to continue with her presentation. The defense lawyer opened his mouth to argue, but the judge raised his hand, silencing him. This court is not here for objections or arguments. Miss Jordan will have the floor. Amelia stepped forward again, her voice calm but strong. Thank you, Your Honor, she said, before turning her attention back to the jury. She began speaking clearly, outlining how the company had consistently broken promises, ignoring employee rights, and finding ways to hide the truth. Each point she made was supported by facts and evidence she had gathered herself. Her words were simple, but they carried weight. She spoke not only for the workers, but also for fairness and truth. The jury listened closely, taking notes as she spoke. The defense team sat quietly, no longer laughing or sneering. Instead, they watched, unable to deny the strength of Amelia's case. As she finished her presentation, Amelia looked directly at the jury. These people trusted their employer, she said softly, and they were betrayed. It's time for that betrayal to be recognized. There was a long pause, as if the room itself was holding its breath. The judge nodded, signaling for Amelia to sit down. She returned to her seat, still composed, but there was a sense of accomplishment in the air. She had spoken the truth, and now the decision was out of her hands. The defense lawyer glanced at his team, who seemed uncertain. The jury, too, seemed to be deep in thought. The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted entirely. No one expected such a strong performance from the quiet woman in the floral dress. And now, all eyes were on the judge, waiting for his next move. The courtroom was silent as the judge took his time to review all the evidence that had been presented. Amelia sat quietly in her seat, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She was no longer nervous. Her work was done, and now all she could do was wait. The jury, too, seemed deep in thought, their eyes focused on the documents before them. Even the defense team, once so sure of their position, seemed less confident now. The judge cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, his voice steady and authoritative, "you've heard the arguments and seen the evidence. Now it is time for you to deliberate." Amelia glanced at the jury. Their faces were serious, some of them furrowing their brows, others nodding thoughtfully. She knew that the case wasn't completely in her hands anymore. It was up to them to decide the outcome. The defense lawyer stood up quickly, adjusting his suit. "Your Honor," he said, "we respectfully ask that the jury consider the full context of the situation. Yes, the plaintiffs have provided documents, but those documents do not prove fraud. They are merely claims. We ask that you return a verdict in favor of the defendant." The judge didn't respond immediately. He simply nodded and gestured for the jury to begin their deliberations. The jurors stood up one by one and filed out of the courtroom, leaving behind a heavy silence. Amelia sat back in her chair, her fingers tapping lightly on the edge of the table. She had worked hard to gather the evidence, to make her case, but now she had to trust that the jury would see the truth. She wasn't worried. She knew she had done everything she could. The real work, the part where the people who were wronged would finally get justice, was now in the hands of others. The defense team, still standing near their table, exchanged quiet words. The head lawyer's expression was tight, his posture stiff. It was clear that he was no longer as sure of the outcome as he had been when the trial began. The minutes passed slowly. It felt like an eternity before the door to the jury room finally opened. One by one, the jurors filed back into the courtroom, their faces serious. They took their seats, and the judge looked at them, waiting for their verdict. The room held its breath. The foreman of the jury stood up and addressed the court. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steady, "we have reached a decision." Amelia's heart skipped a beat. She held her breath, waiting for what would come next. The judge nodded. "Please read the verdict." The foreman cleared his throat and began. "We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiffs. We believe the evidence presented proves that the company did indeed commit fraud against its employees." The courtroom was still for a moment as everyone took in the words. Then a soft murmur spread through the room. Amelia blinked, stunned for a brief second, before a sense of relief washed over her. The workers who had trusted her were finally going to get justice. It had happened. The truth had won. The judge nodded, looking satisfied. "The court will now proceed with the necessary actions to ensure the plaintiffs are compensated." Amelia allowed herself a small breath of relief. The battle had been long and difficult, but in the end, the truth had prevailed. The atmosphere in the courtroom changed in an instant. The judge had made his decision, and now it was time to follow through. The murmur in the room grew louder, but Amelia remained still, her face calm. She looked over at the jury, who seemed relieved as well. The weight of the decision had been lifted from their shoulders, and now they could finally see the outcome of their hard work. Amelia felt a wave of gratitude toward the jurors. They had listened carefully, and they had understood the truth. This was not just a win for her, but a win for the workers who had trusted her from the beginning. She had helped them stand up to a system that had taken advantage of them, and now that system would be held accountable. The defense team stood in silence, their faces hard to read. They hadn't expected this outcome. The lead defense lawyer adjusted his tie once more, trying to maintain his composure. It was clear that this was a defeat, and a public one at that. But Amelia didn't let their disappointment bother her. The case was over, and the justice that had been denied to the workers for so long had finally been served. "This court will now adjourn," the judge said, his voice firm and final. "The necessary steps will be taken to ensure the proper compensation for the plaintiffs." Amelia stood up, collecting her things slowly. She glanced around the courtroom, noticing the shift in the way people looked at her. No one was laughing now. No one was dismissing her. Instead, there was a quiet respect in their eyes. As she gathered her papers, she overheard a few people whispering, "Did you hear that? She really did it. Who would have thought?" She was quiet, but she knew what she was doing. "She's amazing, a true professional." Amelia didn't respond to the whispers. She simply smiled to herself and walked out of the courtroom. She had done what she came to do, and now it was time to leave. But she didn't leave alone. The workers, those who had trusted her from the start, gathered around her as she walked out. Their faces were filled with gratitude and relief. For them, this was more than just a legal victory. It was the end of a long fight for fairness. One of the workers, a middle-aged woman, walked up to her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Thank you," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "You've given us our lives back." Amelia nodded, her heart warmed by the words. She didn't need any more thanks. This moment, the moment when justice had finally been served, was enough for her. It was a quiet victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. As Amelia walked out of the courthouse, the sun shone brightly overhead. The day seemed a little brighter now, as if the world itself had taken a step toward fairness. She knew that this case would be remembered for a long time. It would be remembered not just because she had won, but because she had shown that anyone, no matter how quiet or unassuming, could make a difference when they stood up for what was right. Days passed after the trial, but the courtroom victory still felt fresh in Amelia's mind. Life outside the courthouse had returned to its usual pace, but something about the case had changed her. It wasn't just about winning in front of the judge or the jury. It was the feeling of standing up for something important. She had fought for justice, and now she felt a sense of pride she had never known before. Her phone rang one morning, interrupting her quiet routine. She picked it up to hear the familiar voice of one of the workers from the case. "Amelia," the voice said, "we just wanted to check in and thank you again. Everything is moving forward, and we're finally getting what we deserve." Amelia smiled softly, grateful for the words. "I'm glad to hear that," she said. "I'm happy it worked out." "It's more than just the money," the worker continued. "You've changed our lives. You showed us that even when we felt small, we could stand up for ourselves. You gave us the courage to speak up." Amelia felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't expected such an impact. To her, the case had been about doing the right thing, about showing that the truth mattered. But hearing their words made her realize how much more it meant. It was never just about the legal side. It was about the people who had been hurt, who had lost trust, and who had been given a chance to restore that trust. After the phone call, Amelia sat down at her desk and stared out the window. The sunlight was soft, casting a gentle glow over the streets outside. She thought about everything that had led her to this moment, the years of studying law, the quiet nights of research, and the countless hours spent working on cases that never saw the courtroom. All of it had been worth it for this one victory. But more than that, it had been worth it for the chance to make a real difference in someone's life. That evening, she received another unexpected call. This time it was from the judge who had overseen the case. His voice was warm but direct. "Amelia," he began, "I just wanted to take a moment to congratulate you. You handled yourself in that courtroom with integrity and confidence. You may not have been a lawyer in practice for long, but you certainly proved yourself to be one in spirit." Amelia felt a surge of pride, but she kept her tone humble. "Thank you, Your Honor. It was a team effort. I couldn't have done it without the workers trusting me, and without the support of everyone around me." The judge chuckled softly. "I've seen many lawyers in my time, but you stood out. Keep that spirit, and you'll do great things." As Amelia hung up the phone, she felt something shift inside her. She had spent years doubting whether she was truly ready for the legal world, questioning whether she could handle the responsibility. But now she knew that she was capable. More than that, she knew she had the strength to continue fighting for what was right, no matter the odds. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, Amelia felt ready to walk it. One case had opened the door, and now she was determined to keep moving forward. Weeks after the trial, Amelia had found a new sense of purpose in her life. She continued working as a lawyer, taking on cases that challenged her and pushed her skills to new heights. But the case she had won remained the defining moment of her career. It was the one that reminded her of why she had chosen this path in the first place, to make a difference, no matter how small. One afternoon, Amelia walked into her office with a stack of new files. The day was sunny, the kind of day that made everything feel possible. As she sat down to begin sorting through the cases, her assistant knocked and entered with a message. "Amelia, there's someone here to see you," the assistant said. "They say it's about the case you worked on a few weeks ago." Amelia's curiosity piqued. "Send them in," she replied, setting the papers aside. A moment later, a middle-aged man stepped into her office. He was dressed in a simple shirt and jeans, his face lined with years of hard work. Amelia stood up, recognizing him instantly. It was one of the workers from the case, the one who had thanked her so many times. "Miss Jordan," the man said, his voice warm. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "No, of course not," Amelia said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "Please sit. What brings you here?" The man sat down and looked at her with gratitude in his eyes. "I just wanted to thank you again, and let you know how much everything has changed for us. I know you've heard the outcome, but I wanted you to know what it means for us on a personal level." Amelia listened closely, her attention fully on him. "Tell me," she said, genuinely interested. The man's face softened as he spoke. "Since the case, things have been different, not just with the company, but with our lives. Some of us were struggling just to make ends meet before. Now we have a sense of security, of dignity. We know that we're not powerless anymore. And that's something we never thought we'd have." Amelia felt a sense of pride swell in her chest, but she stayed quiet, allowing him to continue. "And it's not just the money," he said. "It's the message. You showed us that we can stand up for ourselves. We don't have to accept being taken advantage of. Your victory gave us the strength to keep fighting for what's right, no matter who we're up against." Amelia was moved. This was why she had chosen this path, why she had gone through the hard work and sacrifice of becoming a lawyer. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about knowing that she had helped people change their lives for the better. "Thank you for telling me that," Amelia said, her voice quiet but sincere. "I'm just glad I could help." The man nodded, standing up. "We'll never forget what you did for us, Miss Jordan. You gave us hope when we had none. I'll be telling this story for years to come, about the lawyer who believed in us." Amelia watched as he left her office, the door closing softly behind him. For a long time she sat there, reflecting on the words he had shared. She had always known that what she did mattered, but hearing it from someone who had been directly impacted made everything feel even more real. This was why she did what she did. This was why she fought for justice. As she turned back to her work, Amelia felt a renewed sense of determination. The road ahead would be long, but she knew she was ready for whatever came next. There would be more cases, more battles to fight, but with each one, she was ready to make a difference.